and they kept their promise because they could get no rum. The treaty was conducted very orderly and concluded to mutual satisfaction. They then claimed and received the rum. This was in the afternoon. They were near 100 men, women, and children, and were lodged in temporary cabins built in the form of a square just without the town. In the evening, hearing a great noise among them, the commissioners walked to see what was the matter. We found that they had made a great bonfire in the middle of the square. They were all drunk, men and women, quarreling and fighting. Their dark-colored bodies, half naked, seen only by the gloomy light of the bonfire, running after and beating one another with firebrands, accompanied by their horrid yellings, formed a scene the most resembling our ideas of hell that could be well imagined. There was no appeasing the tumult, and we retired to our lodging. At midnight a number of them came thundering at our door, demanding more rum, of which we took no notice. The next day, sensible that they had misbehaved in giving us that disturbance, they sent 3 of their old counselors to make their apology. The orator acknowledged the fault, but laid it upon the rum, and then endeavored to excuse the rum by saying, quote, "The Great Spirit who made all things made everything for some use, and whatever use he designed anything for, that use it should always be put to. Now, when he made rum, he said, 'Let this be for the Indians to get drunk with,' and it must be so." And he spoke just like that. And indeed, if it be the design of Providence to extirpate these savages in order to make room for the cultivation of the earth, the cultivators of the earth, it seems not impossible that rum may be the appointed means. So Ben says, if God wants us to get rid of the Indians to make room for the people who farm, then rum may just be the way that we do it, that God appoints for it. Quote, "It has already annihilated all the tribes who formerly inhabited the seacoast." In 1751, Dr. Thomas Bond, a particular friend of mine, conceived the idea of establishing a hospital in Philadelphia. Skipping a bit, he was zealous and active in endeavoring to procure subscriptions for it, but the proposal being a novelty in America, he met with little success. At length he came to me with the compliment that he found that there was no such a thing as carrying a public-spirited project through without my being concerned in it. So he comes to Ben and he says there's no public projects unless you're involved, and here's how he knows it. Quote, "I am often asked by those to whom I propose subscribing," so he goes to people and asks for money for this hospital, and they always say to me, quote, "Have you consulted Franklin on this business? And what does he think of it?" And when I tell them that I have not consulted you, Mr. Franklin, supposing it rather out of your line, they do not subscribe, but say they will consider it. End quote. So Franklin now. I inquired into the nature and probable utility of his scheme, and receiving from him a very satisfactory explanation, I not only subscribed to it myself, but engaged heartily in the design of procuring subscriptions from others. Previously, however, to the solicitation. Now, he didn't just go out and start saying, "I got this good idea for a hospital." Quote, "Previously to the solicitation, I endeavored to prepare the minds of the people." Now, we've seen him do this before, by writing on the subject in the newspapers, which was my usual custom in such cases, but which Dr. Bond had omitted. Prepare the groundwork in some sense, so that you don't just spring it on the community if they think it's the hatchpot scheme just off the last week or so, then they are not going to subscribe. The subscriptions afterward were more free and generous, but beginning to flag, I saw that they would be insufficient without some assistance from the Assembly. In other words, got to get government in on this. And therefore proposed to petition for it, which was done. The country members did not at first relish the project, so they're going to put a tax on everybody in the province that the government has the ability to tax. And the people out in the country didn't care for this. They objected that it could only be serviceable to the city, and therefore the citizens alone should be at the expense of it, and they doubted whether the citizens themselves generally approved of it. They were like, why doesn't the city pay for it if the city's going to use it? Probably because the city doesn't want it, so you're going to tax everybody when no one really wants it. So on this basis he formed his plan. Let me skip down a bit here. He got the bill, he wrote this bill, and, quote, this condition carried the bill through. He got the bill carried through the Senate on the condition that whatever amount that they gathered would be doubled by the House. The House would match it if it met a certain minimum. So then when they were soliciting for subscriptions from then on, they were able to say, look, if you'll give us £5 and we get to our line, then we get £5 from the government for your £5, we get £10. The subscriptions accordingly soon exceeded the requisite sum, and we claimed and received the public gift which enabled us to carry the design into execution. A convenient and handsome building was soon erected. The institution has by constant experience been found useful and flourishes to this day, and I do not remember any of my political maneuvers, the success of which at the time gave me more pleasure, or wherein, after thinking of it, I more easily excused myself for having made some use of cunning. So, writes a pamphlet or whatever, disseminates the idea in public, then comes around and says, you know, this idea people have been talking about, I got a gentleman here, you know. Little do they know, it's all puppet master behind the scenes. Now, to the extent that these things happen in history, this is true, but some people take this and go conspiracy theory with it. People don't have that much power over history. Philosophers do, but they're long dead after their ideas take effect. But continuing. About this time, another guy, Reverend Gilbert Tennant, came to Franklin and says, would you help me in getting subscriptions to put up a new meeting house? Now, Franklin says, no, I can't do it. I won't go solicit for subscriptions. I just went and did it recently, and I won't make myself disagreeable by going and begging all the time. I just refused. So then he wants a list of the persons, and Franklin says, no, I'm not going to give you a list of the persons that I went to. That would be very disingenuous of me. So Franklin gives him the following advice. He says, quote, in the first place, I advise you to apply to all those who you know will give something. Next, to those who you are uncertain whether they will give anything or not, and show them the list of those who have given. And lastly, do not neglect those who you are sure will give nothing, for in some of them you may be mistaken. He laughed and thanked me, and he said he would take my advice. He did so, for he asked of everybody, which is what the advice is, and he obtained a much larger sum than he expected, with which he erected the capacious and elegant meeting house that stands in Arch Street. Here we join Benjamin Franklin. He's in conversation, talking about a gentleman he's in conversation with. This is a general who has been ordered to take Fort Duquesne, D-U-Q-U-E-S-N-E. I'm sure someone knows how to pronounce that, and you probably get the pronunciation online. So he's talking to this general, and the general's giving Benjamin Franklin an account of his intended progress, how he's going to go about this. Quote, after taking Fort Duquesne, he said, I am to proceed to Niagara, and having taken that, to Frontenac, if the season will allow time. And I suppose it will, for Duquesne can hardly detain me above 3 or 4 days. Then I see nothing that can obstruct my march to Niagara. Having before revolved in, end of quote from the general, Benjamin says, having before revolved in my mind the long line his army must make in their march, by a very narrow road to be cut for them through the woods and bushes, and also what I had read of former defeat of 1,500 French who invaded the Illinois country, I had conceived some doubts and some fears for the events of the campaign. So he thinks about this general's army weaving on this long, skinny road